At 2:44 a.m. Gulf Standard Time on April 4, 2026, the Facilities Management System at Amazon Web Services Middle East Region 1 data center complex in Bahrain registered an anomaly that its automated response protocols classified as a sensor malfunction. Temperature in server hall C, 31 degrees Celsius. Normal operating range, 18 to 27 degrees Celsius. The automated system logged the reading, flagged it for morning review, and continued operating normally. At 2:51 a.m., temperature in server hall C reached 38 degrees Celsius. At 2:58 a.m., 44 degrees Celsius. The automated response system activated emergency cooling protocols, backup chillers, increased airflow, load redistribution to cooler halls. At 3:02 a.m., the backup chillers failed to respond, not because of a mechanical failure, because the industrial control systems managing the chiller infrastructure had received new operating instructions at 2:43 a.m., 1 minute before the first temperature anomaly. Instructions that told every cooling unit in the facility to execute a controlled shutdown sequence and lock out manual override for 4 hours. Those instructions came from inside the building's own management network, from credentials that belonged to a facilities engineer who had left the company 8 months ago and whose access tokens had never been revoked. At 3:17 a.m., the first server racks in Hall C began thermal throttling, automatically reducing processing speed to generate less heat as a survival mechanism. At 3:31 a.m., the first servers began emergency shutdown. At 3:44 a.m., exactly 1 hour after the initial anomaly, AWS declared a P1 critical infrastructure event and began emergency failover to European and American regions. But AWS Bahrain was not the only facility that received new instructions at 2:43 a.m. Microsoft Azure's UAE North region in Dubai received the same instructions through a different compromised credential at 2:43 a.m. Google Cloud's Qatar facility received them at 2:44 a.m. Oracle Cloud's Abu Dhabi data center received them at 2:45 a.m. 4 facilities, 4 companies, coordinated to within 120 seconds, all of them running cooling shutdown sequences that locked out manual override for 4 hours. All of them in a region where the outside air temperature at 3 a.m. in April is 34 degrees Celsius and climbing toward a daytime high of 47 degrees Celsius. You cannot cool a data center with 47 degrees Celsius air. When the mechanical cooling stops, the laws of thermodynamics take over, and thermodynamics does not have a patch cycle. To understand why this attack is different from every other cyber operation in this conflict, and why $2.3 trillion in digital infrastructure is a more precise number than it sounds, you need to understand what these 4 facilities actually do. The Middle East cloud region is not a backup location for data that primarily lives elsewhere. It is the primary infrastructure for an economy. The financial systems of the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia run on cloud infrastructure hosted in these facilities. Swift transaction processing for Gulf banks, stock exchange matching engines, insurance policy databases, government identity systems, healthcare records for 50 million people, air traffic control support systems, oil production monitoring for facilities that together produce 15 million barrels per day. When AWS Bahrain goes down, it is not a website that becomes unavailable. It is the processing infrastructure for the financial backbone of a region that controls 30% of the world's oil supply. Let me give you the temperature mathematics, because this is where the operational reality diverges most sharply from the reassuring language of disaster recovery planning. Modern server hardware, Intel Xeon processors, NVIDIA GPU clusters, the storage arrays that hold the data, is designed to operate reliably between 18 degrees Celsius and 27 degrees Celsius. Above 27 degrees Celsius, performance begins to degrade. Above 35 degrees Celsius, thermal protection circuits begin emergency shutdowns to prevent permanent damage. Above 45 degrees Celsius, permanent damage to silicon occurs regardless of protective circuits. The data centers in Bahrain, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi have internal temperatures that are now at 4 a.m. between 38 degrees Celsius and 41 degrees Celsius and rising. The cooling lockout expires at 6:43 a.m., 4 hours after the shutdown commands were issued. By 6:43 a.m., without external intervention, server hall temperatures will reach 47 degrees Celsius to 52 degrees Celsius. At 47 degrees C, permanent hardware damage is occurring. At 52 degrees C, catastrophic failure is occurring. The 4-hour lockout window was not chosen arbitrarily. It was chosen because it places the peak temperature event at approximately 6:30 to 7 a.m. When facilities engineers are arriving for morning shift, when the lockout is about to expire, when the temptation to wait for the lockout to clear, rather than attempting a manual physical override, is highest. Manual physical override of an industrial cooling system lockout requires physically accessing the chiller control panels, bypassing the software lock at the hardware level, and manually restarting the cooling sequence, a process that takes 45 to 90 minutes for a trained engineer who knows the specific system. Most of the engineers who know these systems intimately are not on site at 3 a.m. They are being called from home. They are stuck in Dubai traffic. They are arriving at facilities whose access control systems may also have been compromised by the same intrusion that hit the cooling management systems. The 4-hour window is precisely calibrated to be long enough for serious damage to occur and short enough that it expires before anyone can definitively prove the damage was intentional rather than accidental. If you understand why a 4-hour cooling lockout is more precisely engineered than a missile strike, subscribe right now. Because what I am about to give you is the damage assessment that the cloud providers are conducting in real time and have not yet shared publicly. Let me give you the numbers on what happens to data center hardware at 47 degrees C for 90 minutes. Modern data center hardware replacement cost, approximately $8 to $12 million per megawatt of IT load. AWS Bahrain's Middle East Region 1 has an estimated IT load of 180 megawatts. Microsoft Azure UAE North, approximately 220 megawatts. Google Cloud Qatar, approximately 140 megawatts. Oracle Cloud Abu Dhabi, approximately 90 megawatts. Total IT load across 4 facilities, 630 megawatts. Hardware replacement cost at $10 million per megawatt, $6.3 billion in potential hardware losses. But hardware is the smaller number. Hardware can be replaced in 6 to 18 months with sufficient supply chain priority. What cannot be replaced quickly is data integrity. Modern data centers use storage systems that are designed to survive individual component failures through redundancy, RAID arrays, erasure coding, replication across multiple drives. These systems are not designed to survive simultaneous thermal events across an entire facility. When temperatures exceed 50 degrees across an entire server hall, the redundant copies of data fail simultaneously. The RAID array that protects against one drive failing does not protect against every drive in the array failing at the same time, because every drive in the array is at 56 degrees. The cloud providers have off-site backups, all of them. The backups are in European and American regions. The restoration process, pulling data from off-site backup and restoring it to new hardware in a rebuilt facility, takes weeks to months for large-scale data. For the Gulf financial system, weeks to months of data restoration means weeks to months of operating on backup systems that do not have the capacity, the speed, or the real-time data feeds of the primary infrastructure. The oil production monitoring systems that track 15 million barrels per day of Gulf output, running on degraded backup infrastructure, introduce errors and delays into the feedback loops that keep production optimized. Small inefficiencies in production optimization at that scale cost millions of dollars per day. The swift transaction processing that clears Gulf banking activity, running on European backup infrastructure with 400 milliseconds of additional latency, misses timing windows for time-sensitive financial transactions. At Gulf banking volumes, 400 milliseconds of additional latency costs approximately $340 million per day in missed transaction windows. $340 million per day, from latency, not from outage, from the difference between processing in Bahrain and processing in Frankfurt. Now let me tell you what the cloud providers are saying, and where their statements diverge from what their engineers are actually facing. AWS issued a Service Health Dashboard update at 3:47 a.m. Gulf time, acknowledging elevated error rates and increased latency for services in the Middle East region, and stating that our team is actively investigating and working to restore full service. The dashboard update did not mention temperatures. It did not mention the cooling lockout. It did not mention that actively investigating means facilities engineers are physically inside server halls at 41 degrees, trying to bypass software locks on industrial chiller systems while servers are shutting down around them. Microsoft Azure's status page showed service degradation in UAE North with mitigation in progress. Google Cloud showed incident under investigation in its Qatar region. These are the standard phrases that cloud providers use for any outage, from a software misconfiguration to what is actually happening right now. The phrases are designed to be accurate without being alarming. They are accurate. They are not adequate to describe a physical infrastructure attack that is melting $6.3 billion in hardware in 4 countries simultaneously. Here are the 3 problems that make this harder to recover from than any previous cloud outage. Problem 1. The simultaneity. Cloud providers design their disaster recovery around the assumption that failures are independent and local. A power outage in Bahrain is covered by failover to Dubai. A cooling failure in Dubai is covered by failover to Bahrain. The entire architecture of regional redundancy assumes that 2 facilities in the same region will not fail at the same moment. 4 facilities failed within 120 seconds of each other. The regional redundancy architecture that was supposed to absorb any single failure is absorbing 4 simultaneous failures and routing the combined load to European and American regions that were not sized to absorb it. AWS's European regions are currently operating at estimated 340% of normal load. The cascade of performance degradation is spreading westward. Problem 2, the credential compromise. The intrusion used legitimate credentials from a former employee. Cloud providers are now conducting emergency audits of all active credentials in their Gulf region management systems, revoking access tokens, resetting authentication, verifying identity across every account with administrative access to facilities management systems. This process, for systems of this scale, takes 18 to 36 hours and cannot be rushed without risking locking out legitimate emergency response personnel. While the audit runs, the cloud providers cannot be certain that the cooling systems that come back online after the lockout expires will not receive new shutdown instructions from a still active compromised credential. Problem 3, the physical environment. The outside temperature in Bahrain and Dubai is heading toward 47 degrees Celsius by 10 a.m. Even after the cooling lockout expires at 6:43 a.m., and engineers successfully restart the mechanical cooling systems. Bringing a server hall from 47 degrees Celsius back to 24 degrees Celsius takes approximately 4 to 6 hours under normal operations. The thermal mass of the hardware, the servers, the storage arrays, the power distribution units, retains heat. You cannot cool a data center instantly any more than you can instantly cool an oven. Full cooling restoration, estimated at 12 to 16 hours after the lockout expires. Earliest possible return to full operations, 8 to p.m. Gulf time. 17 hours after the attack began. 17 hours of degraded Gulf digital infrastructure during a war, during which the financial system needs to process transactions, the oil production system needs to function, and the communications infrastructure that military and government operations depend on needs to be available. Here are the 3 options that cloud providers, Gulf governments, and American Cyber Command are working through simultaneously. Option 1, physical emergency intervention. Deploy military-grade cooling units to supplement or replace the compromised systems. The U.S. military has mobile power and cooling assets that can be positioned at critical civilian infrastructure in allied countries under emergency protocols. The problem: military mobile cooling units are designed for field operations, command posts, forward operating bases. They are not designed to cool 630 megawatts of IT load distributed across 4 large-scale commercial data centers in 3 countries. The scale mismatch is approximately 100 to 1. Military assets can cool 1 room in 1 facility. They cannot cool what needs to be cooled. Option 2, controlled graceful shutdown. Rather than allowing thermal damage from uncontrolled overheating, engineers execute controlled shutdowns of all hardware in the affected facilities before temperatures reach the damage threshold, preserving hardware integrity at the cost of complete service outage. The problem: controlled shutdown takes 45 to 90 minutes per facility when done properly. The temperature timeline does not allow 45 to 90 minutes of careful sequenced shutdown for all 4 facilities simultaneously. Some hardware will thermal fail during the shutdown process regardless. And controlled shutdown means the same service outage as uncontrolled thermal failure, just with less hardware damage. The business and operational impact is identical. Option 3, Emergency physical bypass, PUFIAM. Send the most experienced facilities engineers directly to chiller control panels, physically disconnect the software control systems, and run the chillers on manual operation until digital control can be re-established safely. The problem? This is what the engineers are already attempting. The 4-hour lockout that prevents software override does not prevent physical bypass. But physical bypass of industrial chiller systems requires specific technical knowledge, specific tools, and physical access to equipment that is located in mechanical rooms that are themselves running at elevated temperatures. The engineers attempting the bypass are working in 40-degree Celsius mechanical rooms with cooling systems that were specifically configured to resist exactly this intervention. Iran did not just attack the cooling systems, it attacked the repairability of the cooling systems. Here is what you need to understand as we close. The entire digital economy of the Gulf region runs on physical infrastructure that requires electricity and cold air. Electricity is hardened. Multiple feeds, multiple generators, multiple UPS systems. Cold air was not hardened. Cold air was protected by redundant mechanical systems and sophisticated building management software. Software that, it turns out, can be accessed through an 8-month-old credential that nobody revoked. Cost of the attack: estimated at $3 to $5 million for the multi-year operation that identified and maintained access to the compromised credentials across 4 different cloud providers' facilities management systems. A feat of patience and technical penetration that rivals the 16-month IFF operation. Potential hardware damage, $6.3 billion. Financial impact from 17 hours of degraded Gulf digital infrastructure, estimated at $4 to $8 billion in delayed transactions, missed processing windows and cascading service failures. Long-term impact on cloud adoption in the Gulf region, incalculable but negative. Every government, bank, and oil company that was moving workloads to cloud infrastructure is now reconsidering the physical security assumptions underlying that decision. $5 million. 4 credentials, 120 seconds of coordinated execution. $6.3 billion in hardware at risk, $8 billion in operational impact, 17 hours of degraded infrastructure for the financial backbone of the world's most important oil-producing region. And the weapon that did all of this was not a missile, not a drone, not a cyber attack on the servers themselves. It was a shutdown command sent to an air conditioner. Share this video, because the coverage will show you AWS service status dashboards and statements about mitigation in progress and cloud provider assurances about redundancy. It will not tell you that 4 facilities failed within 120 seconds of each other. The event that breaks the redundancy model. It will not explain the 4-hour lockout that was calibrated to place peak damage at the moment of maximum morning traffic. It will not do the math on what $340 million per day in transaction latency means when it compounds across the 17-hour outage window. They will give you the version where redundancy works and service is restored and the system demonstrates its resilience. I just gave you the version where the redundancy model assumed independent failures, 4 facilities failed simultaneously, and the most sophisticated digital infrastructure in the region was defeated by an 8-month-old password and the laws of thermodynamics. Wharf, 47 degrees Celsius outside. $6.3 billion inside. 4 credentials, 120 seconds. The most advanced computing infrastructure on Earth. Defeated by the one force that every data center engineer knows cannot be negotiated with. Heat.